Welcome back. In today's video, I'll be talking about a few things. First up, I'll be talking about why exercise selection should be individualized. Secondly, I'll be talking about why I prefer to focus on bar speed as opposed to mind-muscle connection. Thirdly, I'll be talking about how accurate people are at gauging reps from reserve or how close they are to failure. I'll give a quick update on how my prep is going, and finally, I'll discuss ideas for future videos once this prep series is over, or just videos outside of this series, I suppose. So first up, I want to talk about why exercise selection should be individualized. Now, on principle, certain exercises have better stimulus-fatigue ratios and or better for hypertrophy than others. So for example, a full range of motion high bar squat is likely better for quad growth than a partial range of motion leg extension, for a variety of reasons, that overall result in a better stimulus-fatigue ratio for the quads for muscle growth in the high bar squat than in the partial range of motion leg extension. And on principle, there are differences. However, when it comes to individuals, that can vary. For example, if a given person, in my example, I get hip flexor cramps while doing sumo squats or Smith machine squats. And so while on principle, those exercises are good choices for hypertrophy of the glutes and quads respectively, they may not have a great SFR for me personally, and in my case, other exercises may be superior, even though in principle they might not be. And so individualizing exercise selection can be very important. Let me give you another example. If someone has a really high perceived exertion, so if they find a certain exercise very effortful psychologically, for example, I find split squats extremely fatiguing, in part because you have to do both legs separately, but I find them so fatiguing personally that other exercises may have a much better SFR for the glutes than split squats, for example, sumo squats or even deadlifts. And so in my case, specifically, those exercises might be a better choice than split squats. And I think that reasoning should apply to all exercises, where on average, some exercises have a better SFR, but then when it comes to the individual, some people have worse SFRs and better SFRs with different exercises, and so you should always consider the individual's SFR when selecting exercises for a body part. Now, I want to talk about why I personally prefer to focus on bar speed as opposed to mind-muscle connection. First up, what am I talking about? So during a set or even during a rep, you can focus your mind or your attention on certain cues or certain aspects of a lift. So something that bodybuilders have been recommending for decades now, I suspect, is focusing on the contraction of the muscle while you're lifting weights. So for example, curls here, I'd be focusing on my bicep shortening and lengthening. Now, there is some research in support of this, but there isn't that much research yet. So there are a few studies, I believe, where they compare essentially muscle activation or EMG data when focusing on mind-muscle connection or feeling the muscle contract versus other cues like bar speed, like being explosive. And it seems like focusing on mind-muscle connection might enhance muscle activation. But that doesn't necessarily mean that focusing on my muscle connection will actually lead to enhanced muscle growth over the long term, over a whole program, for example. That is an inference that people often make, or an assumption that people often make, that isn't actually warranted. The link between muscle activation, EMG data, and muscle growth isn't as clear-cut or consistent as people think. I'll post a paper in the description if you'd like, but essentially there are a lot of assumptions you have to make for the link between EMG data and muscle growth to be solid, and a lot of those assumptions just can't be made with any confidence. And so EMG data as a whole shouldn't be used very much to make exercise selection decisions. At any rate, so there is some EMG data showing that focusing on muscle connection might enhance muscle activation. However, how does this actually translate into the long term or across the whole program? There's been one study, I believe, on mind muscle connection and actual muscle growth, and that was conducted by Brad Schoenfeld. Essentially, focusing on my muscle connection, so focusing on the muscle contracting, seemed to lead to slightly better muscle growth in some muscle groups than just focusing on bar speed, so on lifting the weights explosively and forcefully. Now, that is one study, and it was in one. The difference was only significant in one muscle group, if I recall correctly. And so honestly, I wouldn't put much weight into that just yet. And that brings me to my own personal experience with my muscle connection. For around maybe a year or so, I focused on mind muscle connection during all of my sets. And the issue that I ran into, and that I think a lot of people run into when focusing on my muscle connection, is that focusing on my muscle connection makes it a lot more difficult to reach the target proximity to failure. If you're only focused on how the muscle feels, you can lose sight of how hard you're training, whether or not you're getting sufficiently close to failure. And in my experience, and in some of my clients' experiences, focusing on my muscle connection can detract from getting as close to failure as you should be getting. And so, an example, I remember doing face pulls one day with dumbbells back when lockdown was a thing. And I was focusing on my muscle connection. I was doing a working set. I did something like 10 reps, stopped the set, and then realized, maybe I'm not pushing myself as hard as I think I am. And so, for the next set, I decided to focus more so on bar speed, so just lifting the weight explosively on the way up and then controlling it down, such that the tempo wouldn't change too much from when I was focusing on my muscle connection. And so I did that, and I got like 15 reps, so an additional 5 reps on top. And that sort of served as a wake-up call in my case, where I just found that focusing on my muscle connection stopped me from going as close to failure as I intended to. And then when I started focusing on bar speed more so, that made it a lot easier to get closer to failure. And it just made estimating failure a lot easier and allowed me to train harder, make sure I was reaching sufficiently close to failure, and that sort of thing. And so since then, I've mostly focused on bar speed, etc. I think one other reason that's a decent option, besides being able to gauge failure more effectively, is also because if you've been training for a while and you've got good technique and everything, mind-muscle connection just comes naturally. Like, you'll have a pump, you'll feel the muscle working, even if you lift explosively, you'll feel your bicep contracting, lengthening, etc. And so I think focusing on my muscle connection on top of that maybe doesn't yield that much additional growth, if any. And I think it makes it a lot harder to reach failure or reach close to failure. And so I personally prefer focusing on bar speed as opposed to my muscle connection. But if you personally, for example, find that you're able to focus on my muscle connection and still reach close to failure, then by all means keep doing it. But it might be worth experimenting with focusing on bar speed instead and seeing whether or not you can actually do more reps than you thought you could. Next, I wanted to talk about how accurate people actually are at gauging reps in reserve, or how close they are to failure. We actually, and by we, I mean some colleagues of mine and myself, recently pre-printed a study. Pre-printing is just when you essentially pre-publish a study, as in before it's published through a journal, you put the PDF version out there before it's peer-reviewed, just so people can have access to it and read it free of charge, usually, before the peer review process and before the lengthy publication process, because publication can often take months and months, and so delaying that process, delaying seeing your paper out there can be annoying and or delay science as a whole, and so pre-printing your papers can be useful. Anyways, we put out a preprint on gauging reps in reserve and how accurate people are at that. So essentially, we did a meta-analysis on all of the available studies on estimating reps in reserve. So basically, this is how it went. People were asked at some point during a set, say after 10 reps, to tell the researcher how many more reps they could do. So for example, let's say I did 10 reps. The researcher asks me, hey, how many reps can you do? I shout out 5 reps, and then I actually go to failure. And then they compare how many reps you said you could do to how many reps you actually did eventually when you went to failure. And then we took all of those studies where they did this and combined the results and found that on average, across all of these studies where people were asked to estimate reps in reserve and then actually went to failure under the supervision of researchers, we found that on average, across all of these studies, people underestimated how many more reps they could do until failure by 1, which means when people said they could do 4 more reps, on average, they could actually do 5 more. It seems like the lighter a set is, so the higher repetition a set is, the worse people become at estimating reps in reserve, and the more they underestimate how many reps they can do. So up until around 15 reps, people are pretty accurate at gauging reps in reserve, but then above 15 reps, people get worse and worse at estimating reps in reserve. And so if there's one implication there, it's that when you're doing higher repetition sets, you probably want to push yourself a bit harder than you think you should, because at least on average, most people underestimate how many more reps they can do more when they're doing high repetition sets. Now, the link to the study will be in the description. You can take a look. It's free of charge. You can just download it and read it. But in general, for heavier sets, people are more accurate at predicting reps in reserve, and when the prediction is made later in the set, so for example, let's say you're doing a set of 10, predicting how many more reps you can do after 7 reps seems to be more accurate than doing it after 2, which makes sense because as you get closer and closer to failure, you should have a better idea of how many reps you can do. Whereas if you just did your first rep, it's hard to tell, okay, how many more reps can I actually do? So yes, the link to that will be in the bio description. Sorry, I'm too used to Instagram. So check it out. Next, I want to give a brief update on how my prep is going. Currently, as of this voiceover, I am just under 14 weeks out. So I'm like 13 weeks out in 5 days, which is 96 days, I think. Something like that. It's going pretty well. I just started the last cut phase, so I'll be cutting for 4 weeks, maintaining for 1, cutting for 4 weeks, maintaining for 1, and then cutting for 4 more weeks. And so hopefully by then, I should be down to around 90 kilograms or 200 pounds. Currently, before I started this cut, I was around 99 kilograms. That was with a bit more food than usual, so I expect within a week or 2 I'll be down to 96 or 97. And so I'll have around 12 weeks to lose 6 or 7 kilograms, which should be feasible, certainly. I plan on losing around a bit of a pound per week, which should be very feasible for muscle retention and also just for hunger and stuff. I think initially I'll probably lose a bit more weight as I'm still 14 weeks out, and then as I get closer and closer to the actual competition, I'll have to slow down the rate of weight loss. But overall, prep is going pretty well, hunger is manageable, NEAT is manageable, and yeah, I think I added some muscle to my chest and arms during the specialization phase that you're seeing right now. But yeah, I can't complain really. Finally, for the rest of this video, I wanted to ask a few things of you. After this prep series is over, this contest prep series, which will be over in late October, so I'm competing on October 31st. After this series is over, I'll probably start making other videos, so I think this is a good start for YouTube videos because it gets me comfortable with editing software. People can learn a bit more about me as far as contest prep, my thoughts on training in general, because Instagram doesn't always serve as the best medium to convey information, especially in-depth information. And so I think this is a good start, but eventually I want to make more production-heavy videos. For now, it's just a matter of documenting my contest prep, but eventually I want to get into some more, production-heavy videos. So a few ideas I had already were the basic bitch, 10,000 calorie, 20,000 calorie challenges. So I think after my show is done, I've got 3 ideas so far. A 10,000 calorie challenge, just casually, like eating whatever food I want to eat. Then one 10,000 calorie challenge with quote unquote clean foods, which I realize isn't strictly defined, but basically just eating foods that most people wouldn't consider cheat foods, I suppose. And then finally a 20,000 calorie challenge, as in a day, of course. So those are my 3 ideas for now, which I'll all do after my show is done. So yeah, those are my 3 ideas. I probably could come up with more, but what I wanted to ask of you is if you have any videos you want to see, then please let me know. I might start making more vlog type content down the road, where I document what my life is like, what I do in a day, that sort of thing. It feels a bit weird given I don't think my life is all that entertaining or that interesting, but I realize that's probably what most people think before making day in the life type content. So yeah, those are my main ideas for content for now. I'm getting better and better with editing software. I've been taking a course on Adobe Premiere Pro 2021, which is what I'm using. So I'm getting better at that, but I'm also not really using much of it yet, because for now I've been quite busy with PhD work, coaching work. I'm moving places in a week. I'm getting a car. There's just been a lot of admin stuff. I'm also going on holidays for 10 days fairly soon. So there's been a lot of other stuff on my plate, which means I haven't been able to put that much effort into these videos besides, doing a voiceover, talking about training, and then uploading them. But soon enough, I'll put more production effort into these videos, and yeah, that should be interesting. But that's about it for this video, if I'm being honest. I think I discussed everything I want to say. I'll try and start timestamping these so people can just access the topics they're interested in. I might also eventually start a podcast, but that's still in the works. But yeah, please let me know any suggestions for future videos, like challenges or informative videos, like science-based videos, or anything else you want to see. Please put them in the comments and I'll make sure to get them. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, subscribe. It helps out. And I'll see you again next week.